Young waitress. Helped a lost dad at the cafe. She didn't know he was a CEO millionaire. Single father. "Excuse me, sir, your daughter's been standing on the chair for 5 minutes," a customer at table 4 snapped, her voice sharp above the ambient hum of the cafe. It was unusually packed that Thursday afternoon in the cozy Portland shop known for warm cinnamon lattes and worn leather booths. Behind the counter, Lena Harper, 24, blonde and composed despite the crowd, looked up from arranging pastries. Her eyes locked on a man in his late 30s, suit wrinkled, face lined with exhaustion. He gently reached for the little girl beside him, but she didn't respond. She stared out the window, fingers tracing invisible patterns on the glass. Lena stepped forward, soft in her movements. She knelt beside the girl, ignoring the frustrated whispers nearby. The girl, 6, maybe, was moving her hands in deliberate shapes. Lena signed gently, "What would you like to drink?" The girl turned, startled. Her wide blue eyes met Lena's. Slowly she signed back, "Strawberry milk." The man straightened in shock. "Wait, did she just respond?" Lena smiled, then pulled a small notepad from her apron and wrote, "I'm deaf too, I understand." His gaze dropped to the paper. His voice lowered. "She hasn't answered anyone in almost a year, not even me." Lena nodded, then signed to the girl again. "I'll get your milk." When she returned, the child sat quietly, legs swinging, tapping a rhythm on her knee. Lena placed the drink in front of her with a little flourish. The girl gave a shy smile. The man watched, eyes flickering with something between awe and heartbreak. They ate in silence, grilled cheese for the girl, black coffee for him. Occasionally the girl smiled at Lena's little jokes, sometimes signing, "Thank you," or "funny." When they got up to leave, the man paused at the counter, as if forgetting something. He scribbled on a napkin and tucked it under his coffee cup. Minutes later, Lena returned to clear the table. She found the note and unfolded it. "Thank you for making her smile." She held the napkin gently, as if it might crumble. Her heart fluttered, not because of the note, but because of how carefully it had been written, because of how the little girl had looked at her, like someone who'd finally found light after too much dark. She turned toward the window, but they were gone. Lena tucked the napkin into her apron pocket. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the man's hollow kindness, his worn-out suit, his weary eyes. Maybe it was the girl, Sophie, she'd seen the name stitched on her tiny backpack, who felt like a mirror of him, quiet, fragile, but when she smiled it was like watching someone breathe again for the first time. Back behind the counter, Lena moved a little slower, her mind lingering at that corner booth. What she didn't know was that the man, Daniel Carter, had once launched a tech empire from a Seattle garage, commanded boardrooms with ease, and now lived in hiding, fleeing headlines, fleeing a courtroom, fleeing a woman who had torn their family apart. And Sophie, his daughter, hadn't spoken since the day her mother left. Daniel had no map, no plan, just one mission, to protect his daughter. And today, for the first time in months, he had seen her respond to Lena. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and laundry detergent. Nestled above a flower shop on Portland's east side, Lena's home was modest but cozy, with yellow walls and handmade curtains fluttering in the breeze. A kettle whistled as she poured chamomile tea into 2 mugs. Her 16-year-old sister, Lily, sat on the couch, surrounded by textbooks and highlighters. Her hearing aids rested beside her. Like Lena, she was deaf, but her world was brighter, less burdened by silence. Lena handed her a mug and signed, "You need sleep, not more history." Lily smirked. "You need less worry. I'm fine." Lena smiled back, though fatigue tugged at her features. Between cafe shifts, medical bills, and late rent, she felt like she was walking a tightrope every day. She had once dreamed of becoming a teacher for deaf children, but Lily needed her, so she worked, quietly, steadily. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cafe windows. Lena moved gracefully between tables, greeting regulars with warm smiles and swift fingers. She glanced toward the door and froze. They were back. Daniel and Sophie stood in the entrance. Sophie clutched a stuffed fox and scanned the room. When she spotted Lena, her face lit up. She signed a little clumsily but clearly, "Hello, friend." Lena beamed. "Hello, Sophie. I missed you," she signed. Daniel looked slightly more rested, though still preoccupied. They settled at their usual table, and Lena brought over strawberry milk without asking. "Did she say friend?" Daniel asked, surprised. "She did," Lena replied via her notepad, adding a wink. "I'm impressed." "And grateful," he said. "I'm Daniel. I guess you already know Sophie." Lena nodded and scribbled. "Lena, nice to meet you properly." Daniel looked around, then leaned in slightly. "I told Sophie we're on vacation. Truth is, I'm taking time off, trying to reset." Lena nodded again. Everyone had something they were running from, even if they never said it aloud. Once their order arrived, Lena returned to her other tables, but her eyes kept drifting back. Sophie traced shapes on the window. This time, she smiled more. Daniel whispered something that made her giggle. After they left, Lena noticed a small leather-bound notebook on the table. She opened it carefully. Inside were drawings of hand signs, labeled in pencil. "Hello," "Thank you," "Milk," "Love." On the first page, a note, "Trying to learn so I can stop being afraid of the silence." Lena's chest tightened. He was learning. For Sophie. And maybe, just maybe, for her too. She placed the notebook behind the counter, meaning to return it. But truthfully, she hoped he'd come back. Daniel intrigued her. Not like some romantic mystery, but because of the way he looked at his daughter. Like she was the only thing holding him together. He was gentle, quiet, but there was sadness in his eyes, guilt in his posture. Lena recognized it. She'd seen it in herself, in Lily, in the mirror. She understood silence and the weight of what was left unsaid. That evening, back home, Lily noticed the shift in her sister. "You're smiling," she signed playfully. "Is it the guy from the cafe?" Lena rolled her eyes, though warmth lingered. She took the napkin Daniel had left days earlier, "Thank you for making her smile," and set it beside the notebook. She didn't know who Daniel really was, but she knew this. He was a father trying, and Sophie had smiled today. That was enough, for now. The motel room was quiet, punctuated only by distant traffic and the creak of an old radiator. The place was modest, nested between a laundromat and a boarded-up bookstore in East Portland. Its faded green carpet and mismatched lamps suggested better days, but Daniel barely noticed. He sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on his daughter, as she colored quietly on the floor. Sophie lay on her stomach, colored pencils scattered around. Her expression was focused and calm, but silent, always silent. Daniel exhaled slowly and ran a hand through his hair. For 2 years he had built walls around himself and Sophie to protect whatever remained. After winning custody from Alina, a battle that revealed her affairs, lies, and negligence, he had taken Sophie out of Seattle. His victory felt hollow. His daughter still hadn't spoken. He wondered sometimes if she ever would. His phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from his lawyer. Elena was threatening to appeal. Again. She wanted Sophie back not for love, but for leverage and headlines. Daniel could still hear her voice, silky and cruel. "You're playing the grieving dad. You don't know how to raise a child." He glanced at Sophie, gently shading the sky in her drawing. She was his world, and yet he felt he was failing her. Later that afternoon, needing groceries, Daniel took Sophie to a small shop on Hawthorne Avenue. He pushed the cart slowly, one hand resting on her shoulder, the other scanning shelves. He wasn't prepared for the blonde flesh around the produce section. Lena, her hair was tied messily, her tote bag over one shoulder, bananas in hand. She looked surprised for a moment, then smiled warmly, without hesitation. Sophie's face lit up. She dropped the apple she held and ran to Lena, who caught her softly and laughed silently as Sophie signed, "Happy." Daniel approached, suddenly self-conscious of his wrinkled shirt and tired eyes. "Hi," he said, softly. Lena signed back, then scribbled on her notepad. "We always bump into each other where it smells like fruit." Daniel chuckled. "Sophie's drawn to you," he said. "She doesn't run to many people." Lena glanced at Sophie, miming a playful dance move between apples and oranges. "Would you like to walk with us?" he asked after a slight hesitation. There's a park close by. Lena nodded. Their walk was quiet but comfortable. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through trees, casting soft shadows. Sophie skipped ahead, turning back occasionally to sign butterfly or tree with gleeful enthusiasm. At a clearing by a pond, Lena sat with Sophie and drew faces in the dirt, happy, sad, surprised, encouraging Sophie to mimic them. Daniel watched from a few feet away, arms crossed, heart heavy, yet hopeful. After a while he joined them. Lena handed him a stick. He knelt awkwardly and etched a small smiley face. Sophie giggled. "You see," Lena scribbled to Daniel, "not bad for a beginner." They stayed until dusk, then headed back. At the sidewalk, Daniel paused. "You always use your apron to dry your hands," he said, reaching into his coat. He produced a small square of white linen, embroidered with LH. "I saw it at a market near the motel," he said quietly. "It's small, but maybe something warm for someone always giving warmth." Lena ran her fingers over the thread. Her lips parted slightly, wordless. She looked into his eyes, shimmering. Sophie tugged at Lena's sleeve and signed, "Pretty." Lena signed back, "Very." At the parking lot edge, Daniel hesitated, watching Lena walk away, Sophie waving behind her. Across the street, Lena paused and turned back one last time. She signed gracefully, "Thank you for today." Daniel froze in that moment, the breeze tugging at his coat, city sounds swirling around. Yet in that stillness, he felt the echo of her hands, gentle, meaningful. He had not expected her. He had not expected hope to feel like this. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Daniel and Sophie would arrive at the cafe mid-morning, usually after the rush, when the scent of fresh pastries still lingered and sunlight poured in through the wide windows. Lena always had a table ready by the window, with a glass of strawberry milk already waiting. Sophie no longer clung to her father. Instead, she would wave to Lena with her small hands already in motion, signing clumsily but joyfully. Lena knelt beside her each day, introducing a new game, name that animal, emotion charades, or simple drawings paired with signs. One morning, Sophie proudly signed elephant, curling her arm like a trunk. Lena clapped and signed back funny with an exaggerated silly face. Sophie's laughter rang out, bright and loud, startling nearby customers. Daniel froze, coffee halfway to his lips. That laugh. It had been years. He watched as Lena gave all the spotlight to Sophie, her smile quiet, encouraging. That afternoon, while Sophie colored quietly in the corner, Daniel lingered at the counter. "She used to laugh like that all the time," he said softly. "Back when things were different." Lena tilted her head, listening intently. She stopped talking when her mother left. "We tried everything, therapy, special schools. Nothing helped. Eventually, we just stopped pushing. I think I was afraid to face how much of her I'd already lost." He let out a shaky breath. "They say kids are resilient, but maybe they just get good at hiding their cracks." Lena didn't write anything in response. She simply reached over and gently tapped the back of his hand twice, her way of saying, "I understand." He looked at her fingers, then at her. "What about you?" he asked. She thought a moment, then wrote, "I wanted to be a teacher for deaf kids, but dreams cost money, and my sister needed me more." Daniel read the words slowly. "You'd be amazing." Lena blushed and turned away, pretending to tidy the napkin holder. That evening, after the cafe closed, Lena helped Marla, the older woman who owned the cafe, with inventory. Marla sighed at the electricity bill. "Another late notice," she muttered. "I swear these companies raise the rates just to mess with us." Lena didn't respond. She just swept the floor a little longer, as she always did. What she didn't know was that Daniel had overheard that brief exchange earlier, and the next morning, when Marla opened her email, she found a receipt confirming the bill had been paid in full. No name, just a note. "Thank you for giving us a place to laugh." Lena found the note taped beside the espresso machine. She read it twice, then quietly folded it and tucked it into her apron pocket. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were brighter when Daniel and Sophie walked in that morning. Sophie greeted her with a happy wave and launched straight into a new sign Lena had taught her the day before. Lena responded with a smile and handed her a small envelope filled with animal flashcards she had drawn by hand, each one colorful, playful, and labeled in both English and sign. Daniel watched from the booth, his coffee forgotten. He saw Sophie's ease, her joy, the way she now signed freely, confidently. It was like watching the sun rise after a long winter. Lena, in turn, found herself watching Daniel, too, not just the way he looked at Sophie, but the way he listened to Lena, the way he always met her eyes when she signed, the way he never interrupted her silence. Still, fear lingered. He was kind, but guarded. And she was just a waitress with a hearing aid, a dream on hold, and a tiny apartment above a flower shop. That night, after closing, Lena stood by the window folding napkins. Outside, the city glowed softly in the dark. She held the little note in her fingers again, rereading Daniel's words. She wondered if he ever knew how little she had, how much she gave to stay afloat. Would he still come back? He pressed her hand gently over her heart and whispered the words she could not hear. Maybe. The storm did not come with thunder or lightning. It arrived quietly, through a knock on the motel door, and a man in a pressed suit holding a manila envelope. Daniel opened it with trembling hands, eyes scanning the document before dropping it to the floor. Like it burned. A subpoena. Family court. Filed by Elena Taylor, Sophie's mother. She had found them. That night, Daniel sat on the edge of the motel bed, his phone dark in his palm. Sophie was asleep beside him, her breathing soft, her arms curled around her stuffed fox. He watched her chest rise and fall, steady as the ache in his ribs. Elena. Just her name made his jaw clench. She had not cared when Sophie stopped speaking, had not stayed the night at the hospital after Sophie had fallen ill, had not returned even once after packing her bags and disappearing with the man who understood her art. And now she wanted her daughter back. Armed with lawyers and glossy lies, she wanted to claim what she had walked away from. Daniel pressed the phone to his ear, but hung up before it rang. He could not talk to his lawyer yet, not before he figured out what this meant. The next day, he took Sophie to the cafe as if nothing had changed. Lena was already there, setting up flower jars on each table. When she saw Sophie, she waved and signed, "Welcome, sunshine." Sophie signed back, giggling. Daniel tried to smile, but it was stiff. They sat in their usual booth. Lena brought over a plate of banana bread and 2 drinks, black coffee and strawberry milk, like always. She could feel something off in Daniel's demeanor. His hands fidgeted, his eyes didn't settle. After Sophie wandered to the small reading nook, Daniel looked at Lena and spoke quietly. "She's trying to take her back," he said, voice strained. "Her mother." "Elena." Lena's brow furrowed. She wrote quickly on her notepad. "How?" Daniel explained in clipped words. "Subpoena, court date, custody challenge." He did not say Elena's name more than once. Lena read every word with a growing heaviness in her chest. When he finished, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a small velvet pouch. He placed it on the table and slid it toward her. Lena hesitated before opening it. Inside was a delicate bracelet made of braided thread and a single metal charm, engraved with the American Sign Language symbol for hope. She looked up, eyes wide. "You gave that to us," Daniel said softly, without meaning to. "Before we met you, Sophie hadn't smiled in months. She wouldn't touch me, wouldn't eat without crying. And then you signed to her, and she started to come back." Lena's hands shook as she picked up the bracelet. Daniel reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I don't know how this will end," he said, "but I needed you to know what you've done for us. You gave us hope." Lena blinked quickly, nodded, then signed, "You're not alone." But he was. He knew it, because soon he would have to fight again. For Sophie. And this time it could get ugly. Elena's lawyers were ruthless. Her money, her charm, they were dangerous. As much as Lena had given him and Sophie, he could not bear the thought of dragging her into the mess. He had seen what scandal did to people. She was quiet, peaceful, honest. She had built a life out of almost nothing. He would not be the storm that destroyed it. That night, back in the motel, Daniel sat at the table, staring at the court papers. His lawyer had called. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out. He looked over at Sophie, drawing in her sketchbook. She had made a picture of the cafe, Lena standing behind the counter, her hands raised in mid-sign. Sophie had written the word safe above her head. Daniel's throat tightened. He would face Elena, but Lena did not need to know. Not yet. The next morning he brought Sophie to the cafe, smiled like nothing had changed. He tucked the bracelet gently onto Lena's wrist as she poured his coffee. She smiled, touched the charm, and signed, "Beautiful." He signed back, "So are you." But when she turned to help another customer, Daniel looked away. He would protect her, even if it meant keeping her in the dark, even if it meant walking into court alone. The cafe felt quieter without them. Lena noticed it immediately, how the mornings seemed longer, how the air hung heavier without Sophie's bouncing curls or Daniel's steady gaze from the corner booth. It had been nearly a week since their last visit. She tried not to worry. People had lives, reasons, schedules, but every day she checked the door a dozen times. Nothing. On Friday, after her shift ended, Lena slipped her sketch pad into her tote bag, packed a box of colored pencils, and caught the bus toward the motel. The sky had begun to turn a pale shade of dusk when she knocked on the room door. For a moment, there was no answer. Then it creaked open. Daniel stood there, shirt slightly rumpled, expression tired but softening when he saw her. "Lena," he said, surprised. "Hey." She raised a hand in greeting, then held up the art supplies. "I thought Sophie might want to draw," she signed with a small smile. Daniel hesitated only a second before stepping aside. "Come in," he said. Inside, the room was dim but tidy. Sophie sat curled in the armchair, arms wrapped around her stuffed fox. When she saw Lena, she lit up, leaping down and running forward with open arms. Lena knelt to catch her in a hug. They settled on the carpet and Lena opened the sketch pad, laying out the pencils like treasures. She pointed to the blank page, then signed, "Let's draw feelings." She illustrated first, a sun with a smiling face, happy, a cloud with raindrops, sad. Then she handed the pencil to Sophie. The little girl stared at the page, her brow furrowed and her lips pressed into a thin line. Slowly, carefully, she began to draw. First a heart, then 2 stick figures, one tall with short hair, the other with long hair tied up in a bun. Both stood beside the heart. Sophie pointed to the figures, then to Daniel, then to Lena. Lena's breath caught. Behind them, Daniel watched silently from the kitchenette. His shoulders slumped, hands braced on the counter. Later, while Sophie napped, Lena stood at the sink, quietly rinsing 2 mugs. Daniel came to stand beside her. "She drew a family," he said, voice quiet. Lena nodded without turning. "I'm losing her," he added, more to the faucet than to her. "Alina's coming for her. Court hearings in 3 days. Her lawyers are aggressive. She's just starting to heal. And I'm about to rip her open again." Lena set down the mug, dried her hands, and turned to face him. She didn't sign anything. Instead, she placed one hand gently on his shoulder, fingers curling slightly, grounding him. Her eyes said the rest. "I'm here." He inhaled sharply, a tremor in his chest. Then came a sound. We both turned. Sophie stood in the hallway, clutching the drawing. In her small hands was a crumpled piece of paper she had taken from Lena's sketchbook. On it, in shaky, uneven letters, she had written, "I do not want to go. I love Daddy. I love Lena." Then, slowly, she raised her hands and signed, "Family." Daniel knelt, reaching for her. He did not speak at first. He could not. His eyes brimmed and spilled over. He pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her head, whispering, "I've got you. I've got you, baby." Lena stood frozen for a second, then crouched beside them. Sophie reached for her, too, wrapping her arms around Lena's neck and pulling her in. For a long moment, the 3 of them simply stayed there, in a silent, sacred huddle of emotion, tears, love, and light. Later, when Sophie had fallen back asleep, her drawing clutched against her chest, Daniel walked Lena to the door. "She needs to say this in court," he said, his voice steady now, purposeful. "I need to make them see her, hear her." Lena looked at him with wide eyes. He gave a tired smile. "Thank you for tonight. You gave her the courage to speak with her hands. I don't know what I'd do without that." Lena signed. "She's brave because she's loved." Daniel nodded slowly, and for the first time since the subpoena arrived, he believed he might actually have a chance. He just hadn't told Lena yet what was coming next. The courtroom was cold, all steel edges and sterile light. Daniel adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, not out of vanity, but to keep his hands from trembling. Across the aisle sat Elena. She looked immaculate. Sleek black dress, blood-red lipstick, heels that clicked confidently on the tile floor when she entered. Her hair was styled to perfection, her posture straight-backed and theatrical. But her eyes were cold, icy, calculating. She barely looked at Sophie. The judge, a silver-haired woman with a sharp tone but kind eyes, opened the hearing with formalities. Then came the onslaught. Elena's attorney stood first, a man with a voice like polished glass. "My client," he said, gesturing to Elena, "is the biological mother of this child. She has always had the best intentions, despite being misled, excluded, and alienated by Mr. Carter, who has taken the child away from all social and educational support systems." Daniel didn't flinch. He kept his hand on Sophie's shoulder. Elena rose smoothly when asked to speak. "She needs structure, a real school, real therapy. He's keeping her in some backroom motel, letting her play with crayons instead of learning. She used to speak, now she only signs. I barely recognize her." Her voice cracked with practiced emotion. "I wake up every night wondering if she's crying for me." Daniel's lawyer rose, but Daniel put a hand on his arm. He stood, calm, steady. "I have no grand speech," he said. "Just one request." He turned to the judge. "Let Sophie speak." There was a ripple in the courtroom. Elena's attorney objected, something about emotional manipulation, but the judge raised a hand. "Let the child approach." Daniel knelt beside Sophie, whispered something, then guided her to the front. Lena, seated quietly behind them, was caught off guard when the bailiff turned and gestured to her. "Can you interpret for the child?" Lena's throat tightened. She stood, walked to the front with careful steps, and signed gently to Sophie. "Do you want to speak?" Sophie looked terrified. Her hands fluttered nervously. Then she turned her head, scanning the room. She saw Elena, rigid, unsmiling. Then she saw Lena. Lena smiled, small but full of love. Sophie stepped forward, took a breath, and spoke. "Lena." Her voice was thin, raspy, barely audible. But it was a word, a name. The courtroom froze. Even the judge leaned forward. Daniel's eyes brimmed instantly. Lena crouched beside Sophie and signed. "Do you want to tell them more?" Sophie nodded. She signed slowly, carefully. "She is not my home. She is a stranger. I do not feel safe." Lena translated, her voice steady. Sophie pointed to Daniel. "He is my safe." Then she turned to Lena. "He helps me talk. I feel loved. I feel seen." The judge raised a hand. "Ms., please translate word for word." Lena nodded, then repeated exactly as Sophie signed. "I want to stay with my dad. I want to be with Lena, too. That is where I feel like myself." Silence. Then a faint sound. Elena's chair creaking as she shifted, stiffly, uncomfortably. The judge took a long pause. Then she nodded. "Sophie, thank you," she said gently. "You may return to your seat." Sophie walked back, Daniel kneeling with open arms. She ran into them. He held her tight, forehead pressed to hers. Lena stood silently, watching. Then Daniel reached out and took her hand. He turned to her, whispered, "You gave her a voice, and you gave me something I never thought I'd have again." She blinked quickly, squeezing his hand back. After a long deliberation, the judge spoke. In light of the child's wishes, her demonstrated comfort and communication progress under Mr. Carter's care, and the lack of substantial presence from the biological mother prior to this case, I award sole custody to Mr. Daniel Carter. A gasp from the gallery. Elena didn't protest. She stood, adjusted her coat, and walked out, heels clicking against the floor, face unreadable. She never looked back. Daniel stayed in his seat for a moment, arms around Sophie, tears streaming down his face. Lena stood nearby, still as a statue. Then Sophie looked up, smiled, and signed one simple word, family. And Lena, through the blur in her vision, signed it back. The house was small and cheery, nestled among blooming dogwoods in a quiet Portland suburb. A white picket fence edged the front yard. Wind chimes tinkled gently beside the porch. Inside, rooms filled with light and laughter spoke of belonging. Lena stood at the kitchen counter, tying her hair up as she packed a tote with teaching tools, flashcards, hand puppets, laminated signing charts. Across town, children waited at the community center for her gentle lessons, the woman who understood their world best. In the living room, Sophie sat cross-legged on the rug, editing a video on a tablet. Daniel sat beside her, offering quiet guidance. On screen, Sophie signed a poem she had written, with Lena's help. Family is the place where hearts are heard. Soft music played under her graceful hands. No voice needed. Her confidence spoke volumes. Lena entered just as the video ended. She paused, watching them from behind. Daniel turned, smiled gently, and patted the couch. They sat together in a long, tender silence, hands finding each other, fingers weaving naturally. Later that week, Daniel did something he'd avoided. He faced the press, not to boast of Carter Tech or his wealth, but to speak about his daughter. "My proudest accomplishment," he shared, "is not building an empire. It's learning to listen without sound. My family taught me that." He did not name Lena, but she was in every photo, the quiet woman with gentle eyes, her daughter clinging to her side. One afternoon, as light tilted west, a car pulled into the driveway. Sophie, coloring on the porch, looked up and froze. Elena had returned. She stepped out calmly, no makeup, no designer clothes, just a cardigan, slacks, and a small paper bag in hand. Her face, though drawn, held something softer now, something almost human. Daniel opened the door, silent. "I'm not here to fight," Elena said softly. "I just wanted to say something to Sophie." Inside, Lena had leaned beside Sophie, who clutched her arm, eyes wide. Sophie signed. "She's here." Lena crouched and gently signed. "You can go, it's okay." Sophie hesitated, then nodded and stepped outside. Elena knelt on the porch as Sophie approached. The little girl waited, silent, poised. Elena's voice trembled. "I don't know if you'll understand yet, but I need to say this. I left you because I thought I wasn't enough. I thought you didn't need me. I was jealous because you'd grown strong without me." She paused, tears in her eyes. "But I see now. You didn't need a perfect mother, you needed love, and I didn't give it." From the bag, she withdrew an old photo of her and Sophie, before everything unraveled. Sophie stared at it for long seconds. Then she signed, "Thank you for coming back to say that." Elena looked up, tears slipping silently. Her gaze found Lena standing just inside the door, calm, compassionate. Elena's voice steadied. "Thank you for loving her, for raising her when I didn't. I hope you and Daniel find the happiness I couldn't give. You deserve it." Lena said nothing, but her silence held kindness. She nodded slowly, offering the only gift she could, forgiveness. Elena stood, shoulders lighter than before, and drove away without looking back. A few days later, the three of them went to the park, the same place Lena had once drawn in the dirt and taught Sophie her first signs. Daniel tossed a ball to Sophie beneath a canopy of trees. Her laughter echoed across the grass. Lena sat on a bench nearby, a book open but forgotten on her lap. Sophie broke free from the game and ran toward her. "Mama," she called, clear and bright. Lena looked up, startled, joy flooding her face as Sophie flung into her arms. Daniel joined them moments later, wrapping both in a long, grateful hug. In that moment, no words were necessary. Love had spoken. "The most beautiful language doesn't need sound," whispered the story. "Only someone willing to listen with their whole heart." If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, take a moment to reflect. Sometimes, the strongest families are not the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose, through love, compassion, and quiet courage. And if you believe, like we do, that the most beautiful language is the one spoken by the heart, then you're already part of our family here. Subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories for more true-to-life tales that heal, inspire, and remind us what truly matters. Your next story might just be the one that changes a life. Till then, keep listening, not with your ears, but with your soul.